Let's jump into a conversation about purity culture. We're
Mhm.
going to kind of mix it up and cut through some of these ideas. And I know that for a lot of folks listening, this is kind of our bread and butter and stuff that we've definitely talked about before. But can you two maybe take a moment to just kind of define that idea and let people know what purity culture means, what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess I'll tell you from my perspective. It was usually when we're talking about purity culture, we're talking about a movement that was kind of big in the evangelical Christian community, and it started in kind of the 1990s, maybe a little bit in the 1980s. That had this big component to it that was about first and foremost the pretty rigid gender roles and this idea of men are bringing a certain brand of masculinity to the table, and women are bringing this version of femininity that's very much rooted in this idea of purity and modesty. And so it was kind of this big push for abstinence only and absolutely no kind of physical intimacy before marriage. And I don't just mean sex, but really anything. And was very mixed up with these practices like getting a purity ring. Like True Love Waits was
Mm,
one of those big programs where people would go, and basically it was focused on like teens and preteens, and like churches and youth groups, and it was this push to get them to basically promise that they would remain quote unquote pure, which is a very problematic term,
sure.
and until after they're married to another Christian partner who has also made themselves, pure until marriage. But it was primarily pushed on girls. It was technically for boys and girls, but the purity aspect of it was really pushed a lot onto girls or people who were being treated as girls, because there's really only two genders and sexes in this conception of relationships. And so it was a lot of just kind of almost coercing people into agreeing to abstinence, no kind of anything to do with sex before marriage. And a lot of people found, years down the road, that that led to a lot of negative outcomes for people who went through that program, like especially guilt and shame around sex, even later on in life.
Yeah. No, and I like to highlight the time that my stepdad gave away like 10 different copies of Joshua Harris's I Kissed Dating Goodbye to like every kid in my grade, so that there was, nobody available to me romantically or sexually, basically until my mid 20s. Nate, before we jump any further, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I grew up in a pretty religious Pentecostal family, so I wasn't forced to wear the purity ring or anything like that. Like Kara said, it is really focused on the girls,
Mhm.
and that's something I think we're going to talk about a lot tonight. Is how religion seems to shame women and reward men for their sexual desires. And growing up, definitely not straight. I kind of already had an inkling that this was all kind of just bullshit and made up, and I was already almost an atheist by the time of about 12 or 13. So I kind of wasn't buying it already for entirely separate reasons, to be honest.
Hey, you
But
worked it out a good 10, 12 years earlier than I did, so good on you.
well, thank you, but thank you. My basic synopsis of purity culture is: if you read it in the Bible or you heard it in church, it's probably bullshit.
Fair enough. Well, so what are some of the like hallmarks or warning signs, I guess, of purity culture thinking in modern life? Because even in strict evangelicalism, a lot of the tenets of these ideas have kind of dropped away. But I mean, there are generations of folks that are still very much carrying those ideals into what is still a remarkably sex negative culture. So, without just saying all bad sex is purity culture, is there a litmus test that you can recommend for how to just notice or be aware of some of that irrational or unhealthy thinking?
Yeah, for me, I think you're exactly right, Christy, that a lot of this thinking has sort of carried over even into other parts of our lives and our ideas about sex and relationships that we don't necessarily associate with a particular religious belief, but they have been, I'm going to say, contaminated by
Mm,
some of these purity culture ideas. Like even this concept of virginity that people have, where, there's this pristine state of, untouched body, which, sometimes people kind of imagine virginity as a sort of a biological or a medical concept, which of course it isn't. It's very
right.
similar to this concept of purity. And it's the idea that, once you've had any kind of intimacy with another person, especially if you are a female or someone who is, identified as female or assigned female, that now you're dirty,
Right.
if you have engaged in this activity. And again, feeling that kind of sense of shame, like slut shaming, I would say is a big outgrowth of this. Not that purity culture is the only thing that has ever been involved in slut shaming, but it's certainly a big participant, I think.
Yeah, it is hard to be a slut out there, but somebody's got to do it. So,
Right, I
uh,
mean, we're here
It's
to
what they
yeah,
help.
say. It's what they say. For me, it's more like it seems like the evolution of the latest scare tactic put forth by those who have a vested interest in the way things have always been. So whether it's like desegregation in the '60s or the Satanic Panic in the '80s or purity culture in the '90s or gay marriage will ruin the family
hmm,
in the aughts, or now it's obviously the trans panic in Texas and Florida with all these awful bills and legislation coming out. It's just the latest iteration of trying to make you scared of something so that these people can control you. For me, it's all about control.
yeah,
The
that
beast takes different forms. Yeah.
no, that hits hard. That hits hard.
Mhm.
And I do think that these are political ideals in a lot of ways. I mean, we're
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
settle in here in just a moment to kind of talk about our own personal sex lives and maybe how we can get rid of some of the gunk and some of the like wrong-headed beliefs. But yeah, these are large scale ideas that have huge impacts on the way that we vote and on the way that the way we fund medicine, the way we even conceive of medicine, just as a starter. So I think that's an important thing to keep in our back pocket right now.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's anytime someone is trying to make you think something without giving you a damn good reason why, think what do they want me to think this for? Like, what are
Yeah,
they
what's
trying
their
to make
motivation?
me
Sure.
think? Yeah, and
Yeah.
news articles, purity culture, church, doesn't matter. Across the board. Maybe this is the nonprofits show and coming out in me here, but healthy skepticism always a good thing.
No, I totally agree with you, Nate, that I was just having a conversation with some of my students the other day about this, which is, whenever someone's like coming at you to tell you, here's what the natural world is like, I'm using heavy air quotes, and here's
Yeah.
what biology says to me, that's a big red flag that you're about to hear not about science, but about someone's ideology, their politics, their religion, and their idea of what social hierarchy they would like to maintain control over. And it's very easy for people to go into justifying this on the basis of its biology, and spoiler alert, it is definitely not.
Yeah, that might be one of the most pervasive and like easy ways to smell out purity culture is when something is ascribed to biology and then you can readily look across the world and find 57 different cultures that do it completely differently.
Right. Yeah, it's weird how biology skipped so many people and the
Yeah,
rest of the animal kingdom.
Right.
it's red-blooded American biology. This is what it
That's
is.
right.
Uh,
I almost passed grade 11 biology, damn it, and I'm gonna give you a lesson. There's only two genders. This is what my teacher told me. It was in a book. I read it in a book. Everything in a book is correct, especially this book, the Bible.
Yeah, it's just very much a science text, obviously.
Sorry, I promised the crew I wouldn't do any more accents. Last time, I promised.
Fair, fair. Well, so what I was hoping to do tonight was to present some of these purity culture beliefs in sort of their like raw, large form, And I feel like most of these things that I'm going to bring up are all topics that anybody who's watching this show has likely already kind of come to terms with and like, no, isn't true. Maybe not. Totally no judgment if you're new here or some of this is a little bit shocking. But what I was hoping is that the two of you could kind of help tease out some of the maybe unnoticed consequences, like some of the little nefarious ways that this sort of thinking like gets into our lives. Make sense? Y'all good to go?
Let's give it a roll.
All right, let's do it. So the first myth that I wanted to bring up is this idea of men being visual creatures. I've heard every different version of this, that men have like a stronger neural connection to their eyes, whereas women are more verbal, so there's more nerve connections to their ears, or that somehow male sexuality is more thoroughly stimulated by visual. I don't even understand where these ideas necessarily come from. I don't want to get super bogged down in the neuroscience here, but if we're talking about like quick litmus test and myth busting, I can definitely tell you that basically anytime somebody tells you there's a cognitive difference between men and women, or a difference in the way men and women think because of biology, you should really hesitate about the rest of what they're about to say.
I bet you it's like the men are hunters, women are caregivers thing. I bet you that's where that
Oh yeah,
comes
you can definitely make that angle,
Yes.
sure.
That just dawned on me, and it's like, yes, mighty hunter, you stay with women, protect Kip.
I mean,
We
you
go
can
hunt
justify
woolly
the
mammoth.
idea however you want to justify the idea, but I think it might not be that well thought out for many, many people.
Well, no, I mean, admittedly, that's a really stupid interpretation, and that's probably why it came to my head right away. But
Sure.
Kara, what have you got there?
I have a book that I was just reading the other day, actually, that's talking about exactly what you were discussing, called Paleo Fantasy by Marlene Zook, who is like one of my favorite anthropologists, who does also a feminist critique of bad science. And she
Mm-hmm.
definitely does a good takedown of this whole, man the hunter idea about how, humans evolved because men were hunting mammoths. And, I guess women just,
Yeah.
by magic started walking on 2 feet, even though they weren't hunting anything. Kind of the whole thing falls apart if you think about it for about 2 or 3 seconds. But it's exactly like you said. People get this idea of what they think the current, relationship or family
Mm-hmm.
structure ought to be, and then justify that by saying, oh, well, we must have evolved to be this way. Everyone, throughout the history of all humans has been this way. And
It's very
that's
post hoc,
not it.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is a way smarter way of putting what just jumped into my head, Kara. Thank you.
No,
Thank
you
so
you
much
said
for
it
that.
right. You got it. It's
That's brilliant.
yeah, it's not.
Yeah, well,
No.
outside of our understanding or mythologizing of like Paleolithic culture, what are some of the other ways that this men as visual creatures myth shows up as?
Oh man, okay, I have to jump in here.
Yeah.
I just the first thing that I think of is, and we this is related to what we were talking about at the beginning too, but this idea of modesty, and how, if men are visual, that means that women are responsible for making sure that they're not being tempted. You can't, in the purity culture world, this would be called, you can't be a stumbling block. And, because women are objects, obviously.
Yeah, when you said the phrase stumbling block, some like deeply lodged emotion that I had shoved down 20 years ago all of a sudden was like, oh, right. And then came bursting forth. Yeah, I
Mhm.
forgot about that term.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it's so dehumanizing. It's, your whole purpose in life is to either get out of the way of men, or you are a block, that a just a literal object that people will trip over because you have nothing else to contribute other than being in the way. And you're being very sinful by doing it, by wearing regular clothes. Because again, in the whole purity culture kind of idea, you're a slut, or you're being a stumbling block, or you're tempting men if you dress the way the rest of the world dresses, which I
Hmm.
guess these people don't realize that there are different styles of dress throughout the world, but they use the word the world. And they mean if you're wearing normal clothes. So you have to go out of your way to make sure that you don't wear clothes that are too tight, or you can't wear shorts that are too short, or anything like that. You can't wear anything that's low cut. And there are different degrees to which people would prescribe these clothes. But even outside of that, like, we see that all the time when every year, in the news, you'll read about something has come up where someone's school district is sending girls home from school because they wore leggings, or they wore a shirt that was off the shoulder. And what's the reason behind that? Well, they're distracting the boys.
Hmm.
And so this thought process is not just wrong, but it's kind of like Nate was talking about, in that it's maintaining this kind of patriarchal hold over people, to where women are out of place in public. You can be excluded if there's a conflict. Women are the ones who don't belong. And if you just show up and have a female body, or female looking body, then you're a distraction, you're wrong, you're evil. And you're disrupting the whole thing. And that's just a way to keep women out of education, out of the workplace, out of the public sphere. And that's, to me, it's hard to see any other goal than that behind that
Yeah.
reasoning.
No, and I don't want to write it out like some well-conceived of conspiracy, because it really is a lot of awkward stumbling back and forth. But there's a reason why these ideas continue. There's a reason why they
Hmm.
perpetuate, because, yeah, there is something very tempting to a particular worldview, that around the idea that a little girl with a skirt that is slightly shorter than they think it should be needs to be sent home so as not to harm or distract from the education of a 7-year-old boy. And that message is reinforced and reinforced
Hmm.
in so many different aspects of the culture, that we might try and blame it on this like bunk neuroscience around vision and sexuality. But there's something very tempting about that idea that keeps it relevant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a dangerous extension of that too is when you get to women being blamed for sexual assaults, and even worse than that, you have these poor Muslim women walking around in black sacks in 110-degree heat because God forbid they should show an ankle and all the Muslim men go wild.
Hmm.
Right. And it's just this whole assumption that, well, she should know that he's going to have a certain thought if she's dressed a certain way. And, kind of to your point, Nate, I guess whatever the biological thing is that, makes men's visual desire go off must vary from culture to culture. So I don't know how that's biological, but
And let me just say,
yeah.
I have nothing against Muslim people. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
that particular part of that law, Sharia law or
Yeah.
whatever it is particularly disgusting to me, and is the end result of this kind of flawed thinking. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I totally hear you. Yeah, it's this idea that, you've done something that has, you've stepped out of your umbrella of protection, as it were.
Mhm.
And now you've done the wrong thing, so you're subject to being assaulted. And you must have known that was coming, because why didn't you cover up more? I mean, it's just, and I'm saying that, kind of like it's an exaggerated way, but that's something that is said to people who are assaulted. It's very much connected to real life consequences
Sure.
that are just outrageously false.
Well, I want to cover a lot more ground tonight, so I'm going to move us on to the next idea. But before I do, can I give each of y'all, 10, maybe 30 seconds to just kind of rapid fire some of the other maybe unintended consequences, or maybe unnoticed consequences of this idea in our culture? Uh, Kara, I'll start with you if you're ready.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, with this whole thing that like men are visual, and there's also then the sort of other side of that, which is that women are not visual. And usually they'll say, oh, women are like emotional, which it's going to take me more than a few seconds to unpack that, so I'm not even going to go there. But this false idea, then, especially if you think about it in the context of purity culture, where people are not receiving any other kind of sex education, usually, you can come out with some really weird ideas about what you're expecting men's sexual response to be. And, people thinking that, oh, well, in the presence of, any kind of female body, because of course men are only attracted to women, and those are the only choices. But you get this idea that, it's not only uncontrollable, but that then the male sexual response will be instantaneous. And, all it takes is, if I flash someone my boobs, he will immediately be aroused, and, everything will be fine. And, perhaps hot take, perhaps men are in fact more complex than that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of the other side effect, right? That it gives off this sort of like every guy is a dad from a CBS sitcom, just this sort of like bumbling oath. It's like, oh, boobies, I'm powerless to stop it. But Nate, anything else you'd like to add before we move on here?
Yes. First of all, I am not Al Bundy. Okay. So, yeah, one couple things. Number one, the effect of men being visual leads to just boring pornography. Right? There's so much better stuff out there that you could be enjoying, like blindfolded sex, for example. And the other thing that really struck me is that this can lead to shallow, kind of broken, shitty relationships as men try to trade up for the hottest girl they can find kind of thing, as opposed to going for a more deeper bond and a more, someone they'll actually be happy with on a more emotional level for longer, which is it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the woman that is being treated like a commodity, and it's bad for the man that thinks he's in this constant competition with his buddies to get the hottest girl at the bar or whatever it is. And this may sound like I'm kind of gaslighting, but I see it all the time. And I'm sure you guys do too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
No doubt.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a real thing.
That's Nate's hot take on this topic.
Well, the next one I'm going to tee up that I think should be quick and easy is perfect sex is spontaneous, involves a penis in a vagina in a single position until simultaneous orgasm. I don't know how many different dumb ideas I captured all in one, but yeah, it's worth pointing out, like, people aren't insects. We don't have these like mating rituals that are like perfectly choreographed. Instead, we're improvised, and we don't start or stop based on any like magical patterns. What would y'all add? What are some of the like maybe more difficult to see consequences of these ideas?
Wait, are you saying I don't have to do a fan dance to get laid, Christy?
I mean, you may or may not. That is really not my business. You have the right to whatever form of sexual expression applies.
I could have saved so much time.
No, I need to see
on this show.
I need to see peacock feathers, just a full array of them at all
I'll
times.
DM you after the show, Kara. I'll DM you later.
Thank you. I'm very visual like that.
well played.
Thank you. Goes with being non-binary. I can play both sides.
Love it.
Yeah, I have like 2 words in response to this. It's performance anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, the pressure that this idea puts on people is just outrageous. It's just the whole concept that it has to be PNV sex that ends in like simultaneous orgasm. Are you kidding me? I mean, I can barely have a conversation with someone without accidentally talking over them. Like, now we have to like coordinate all that too. No, I mean, that's so much pressure. It's not going to happen. And just putting that kind of stress and anxiety on people, I think, to me, is just the best way to not have a positive experience. I'm going to mention a book again here.
Please.
That I read recently, called "Come as You Are" by, I want to say it's Emily Nagoski.
It is a fantastic book. We've definitely talked about it on the show before.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I love that where she basically goes through and like debunks like every part of that statement, which is just, it's just an outrageous amount of pressure to put on yourselves to do anything, and to me, just it's like you're working against yourself at that point when you're making these kinds of rules about how it has to go. Which who said it has to go that way? Why is that the only way to do it? I don't agree. There's plenty of enjoyable experiences I've had that did not include all or even any of those components.
Right. No, those elements aren't necessary. And there is so much incredible sex that we are not having because we feel like sex is only that one thing. Or even if
Mhm.
we dispense with a lot of those ideas, I think there are probably still plenty of people, men and women, listening right now that believe subconsciously that looking at a beautiful woman should instantly make a man's dick hard. And that's just not how it works. And there's plenty of
No.
great sex to be had without a hard dick. And the number of marriages that are destroyed, I mean, frankly, the number of people who are coming and paying me money to talk to them about these things is just remarkable.
And I mean, the number of people who are not coming and then paying you to talk about those things
Sure.
too is probably
Yeah.
Hey. I see what you did there. You y'all are seriously stealing from my notes here because the performance anxiety thing, like I've never planned sex myself, but when there was a certain amount of pressure, like it can kind of, and then
Yeah.
it just it's
And then
not,
when you start to get nervous about it, it just compounds and
It's-
compounds. I mean,
yeah, it
like
snowballs,
Dan
and then
Savage
you're just
says,
like, well, what if it doesn't work? I mean, it probably will. It usually does, but what if it doesn't? And then
I
and now
mean,
I'm on the
erections
spot,
are like
and now the-
Tinkerbell. Like you got to
Yeah.
believe in them in order for them to show up.
3 cheers for Christy's erections. Everybody clap for Christy. Can get it
Yay!
up.
This is not the first time I've heard that. Okay. So we've got a lot more to cover
Wow.
here. Rapid fire. Any final thoughts on sort of the pervasiveness or like the little things that come out of this idea of sex needing to be like spontaneous and require an erection and all of it?
Yeah, I'll go first. If this whole myth of having to stay in one position, as pro tip for any man who's ever had a problem with premature ejaculation, I never have, obviously never, but changing positions can be a good opportunity to catch your breath, maybe cool things off a little bit, and can possibly make for a longer, more extended, more pleasurable experience for all parties involved.
Yeah. That
I've
makes a lot
certainly
of
never
sense
had
to
that
me.
problem, though.
Yeah,
No,
right.
not
No,
me.
naturally,
No.
naturally.
No.
I
Of
appreciate
course
you
not.
being
Of
open
course not.
about it.
There's no blue pills in my medicine cabinet. What are you talking about? I have to go.
No, you're red pills only, right?
Obviously.
No, yeah,
And I
that's
dropped my mouse.
so true. Yeah, and it works the same, for female bodies as well. Like don't put a lot of pressure on your partner to perform, and don't put pressure on yourself to perform either. I'm not saying that it comes, from one person to the other. This kind of thing can come from ourselves, even more, to where you're thinking, why isn't it happening? Oh my goodness, what if it doesn't happen? Am I gonna have to fake it? Like, no, don't do that. Don't. No. But communicate, folks. Like, if you're not expecting it to happen spontaneously, then that leaves space to actually have a conversation about, hey, this is a thing that works really well for me. Or, hey, what do you feel about this? And what's going on now? How is that for you? And would you like to do this or that or the other thing? And, maybe you can actually have a conversation about what really works, which might not be, those components that we just talked about, and actually have an enjoyable time and not feel bad about yourself.
Yeah. I was listening to a presentation by Marty Klein today, and he said that perhaps the greatest sign of like a success or a happiness in your marriage is whether or not you would feel comfortable expressing to your partner, a finger in my butt would actually be great right now. I don't know if how anybody receives that, but it might be a good question to ask yourself. Like, is that anything you could imagine crossing your lips? Obviously, everybody's interests are different, but if you're not comfortable discussing it or asking for that, there's something to be aware of. Uh,
Mhm.
let's do just one more of these very quickly before we jump into the phones. The very common myth is the idea that we owe it to our partners to meet their sexual needs. I think that's a really complicated idea and certainly one we could spend an entire episode on, but it's worth stating just at the outset that marriage and consent are totally different concepts. And I would love to hear from both of y'all about some of the ways that very pervasive message shows up in our daily lives.
Ooh.
Well, I would defer to Kara being the guest, but I just want to say that I hate the word "owe," like owe it to your partner.
Mm.
You know, my partner comes home from work hungry, and I make him a sandwich because I care about him. That doesn't mean I owe it to him to make him a sandwich, or vice versa, right? So I just think that yes, you obviously should care about your partner's needs, but it's a gesture of your kindness to that person. Like you're giving them a gift because you want to, not because you have to. Kara, what do you think?
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's a really wrong framing of the concept. And I don't want to, make it sound all like sunshine and roses, like, oh yeah, you should want to do everything for your partner. Maybe you don't. Maybe there are some things that are, genuine incompatibilities or, differences in interests and things like that. But yeah, to go back to what Christy said, I mean, consent is a thing. Marital rape is a thing. You are not obligated to perform certain acts that you're not comfortable doing. And again, to go back to the whole purity culture thing, and what's problematic about that is that it teaches this idea that according to a biblical passage that some people like to quote a lot, that your body belongs to your spouse. And that's a really strong word. Your body belongs to someone else. Consent was not a part of that framework. And a lot of people do take that to mean that, yeah, you owe it to your partner to be available for whatever it is that they want to do, however often they want to do. And I'm sorry, but a lot of people have different interests and preferences, but also even just differences in the amount of times per week or per month or per however often that they're interested in being intimate. And this idea that someone is hypersexual or not sexual enough, that this is what's normal and you have to conform to this or you're wrong, is completely unfair to people. And just one final point on that is that in this purity culture idea where you're not really allowed to discuss or explore these things with someone before you're married to them, that's a recipe for getting mixed up in relationships to where
Yeah.
you didn't realize you weren't compatible until it was kind of
Yes.
too late. And that's
Yes.
really unfortunate. I definitely ended up in a marriage like that we could have avoided that real easily. But we weren't able to because we weren't able to have those conversations or those experiences ahead of time. And now you're stuck and you're supposed to pretend to be happy. And now you're obligated to do all these things. And I, that's not a good position to put people in.
It's pretty childish. We're gonna go to calls, but I do want to just quickly say that I have experienced this myself, being with a partner who is 10 years my junior, and
Mhm.
sometimes part of being an adult is not getting what you want all the time, right?
Yeah,
Like
fair to
Yeah.
say.
you can't just stomp your feet and say, "Well, I want a peanut butter sandwich." Yeah,
You're
slam.
welcome to want that, but like also be a person.
Exactly. Realize that you're not always going to get it.